You've done everything they told you to do. You go to bed at a reasonable hour. You don't drink coffee after noon. You have a dark room. You've downloaded the sleep apps and bought the expensive mattress and tried the breathing techniques, and still you wake up exhausted. Still, you drag yourself through the day running on caffeine and willpower. Still, you look at the people who claim to thrive on 5 hours and wonder what's fundamentally wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you, but something is broken. Not your body, not your discipline, something deeper. Something in the way modern life has systematically dismantled the conditions your nervous system needs to actually recover. Because sleep isn't just lying in a dark room with your eyes closed. It's a complex biological process that requires very specific conditions to function. And almost everything about how we live now works against those conditions. This isn't about willpower. It's not about getting better at sleeping the way you get better at a skill. Your brain isn't a machine you can optimize through the right routine. It's an incredibly sensitive biological system that responds to signals you're constantly sending, most of them without your awareness. And when those signals are contradictory, when your environment is telling your brain one thing while your lifestyle is telling it another, sleep fractures. And fractured sleep, no matter how many hours you spend in bed, will never fully restore you. Let's start with what sleep actually is, because most people have a dangerously simplified understanding of it. Sleep is not a single state. It's a series of distinct neurological stages, each with specific biological functions, each essential, none of them optional. And understanding these stages is the difference between sleeping and recovering. When you fall asleep, your brain begins cycling through stages. Light sleep comes first, a transitional phase where your body starts to relax, but your brain is still relatively active. Then comes deep sleep, also called slow wave sleep, where the most critical physical restoration happens. Your body repairs tissue, your immune system consolidates, growth hormones are released, blood pressure drops, inflammation decreases. If you're recovering from injury, illness, or physical stress, deep sleep is where that recovery actually occurs. Then your brain shifts into REM sleep. Rapid eye movement. This is where emotional processing happens, where your brain takes the raw material of your day, the experiences, the emotions, the conflicts, and integrates them into long-term memory. It's where creativity emerges, where insight happens, where your brain essentially sorts through everything that occurred while you were awake and determines what matters and what can be discarded. A full sleep cycle, moving through all these stages, takes roughly 90 minutes, and a fully restorative night typically requires 4 to 6 of these complete cycles. Here's what's critical. You can't skip stages. You can't prioritize deep sleep and ignore REM or vice versa. Your brain needs both in roughly equal proportion, and the distribution of these stages changes throughout the night. Deep sleep is concentrated in the first half. REM sleep accumulates in the second half, which means cutting your sleep short, even by an hour or two, disproportionately eliminates REM sleep. And REM sleep is where emotional regulation, memory consolidation, and creative thinking happen. This is why you can sleep 8 hours and still feel terrible. If those 8 hours were fragmented, if you woke repeatedly during the night, if stress hormones kept pulling you out of deep sleep, if light or noise or temperature disrupted your cycles, you never completed enough full cycles to actually restore. You were in bed. But you weren't sleeping, not really, not in the way your biology requires. The single most underestimated factor in sleep quality is light, not darkness at bedtime, though that matters too. Light exposure throughout the entire day. Because your brain's ability to produce sleep at night is directly determined by the quality and timing of light it receives during the day. Your brain contains a structure called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's your master clock, and it calibrates your entire circadian rhythm, the 24-hour biological cycle that governs when you feel alert and when you feel sleepy, based primarily on light signals received through your eyes. When you're exposed to bright, natural light early in the day, particularly within the first hour after waking, your brain registers the start of the cycle. It suppresses melatonin production, which keeps you alert during daylight hours, and it schedules melatonin release for roughly 12 to 16 hours later, which is what triggers sleepiness at night. But here's where modern life breaks this system. Most people spend the vast majority of their day indoors, under artificial lighting that is simultaneously too bright to trigger melatonin suppression properly and too dim to give the brain the strong light signal it needs to set the clock. Then at night, they expose themselves to screens, which emit blue light, the specific wavelength that most powerfully suppresses melatonin. So their brain receives contradictory signals all day. Weak light signals during the day that fail to fully suppress melatonin. Strong blue light signals at night that prevent melatonin from rising. And the result is a circadian rhythm that's perpetually confused. You feel tired during the day because your melatonin wasn't properly suppressed. You feel wired at night because your melatonin isn't rising on schedule. The fix isn't just avoiding screens at night, though that helps. It's actively seeking bright natural light during the day, particularly in the morning. 10 to 30 minutes of direct sunlight within the first hour of waking dramatically improves the strength of your circadian signal. It's not a supplement you can take or an app you can download. It's a biological calibration that requires actual light hitting your retinas. And in a culture that prizes productivity over biological necessity, this simple act of stepping outside and looking at the sky is one of the most powerful sleep interventions available. Let's talk about stress, because this is where most sleep problems actually originate. Not in your sleep habits, not in your environment, in your nervous system's chronic state of activation. Your autonomic nervous system has two branches: the sympathetic nervous system responsible for fight or flight activation alertness, and the parasympathetic nervous system responsible for rest and digest recovery calm. Sleep requires a dominant shift toward parasympathetic activity. Your heart rate needs to slow. Your muscles need to release. Your brain needs to shift from high-frequency beta waves to lower-frequency alpha and then theta waves. This shift cannot happen while your nervous system perceives threat. And here's the problem. In modern life, threat is constant. Not physical threat usually, but psychological threat. Deadlines, financial pressure, social judgment, uncertainty about the future, unresolved conflicts, the low-grade, persistent stress of living in a culture that treats rest as laziness and constant productivity as virtue. This chronic stress keeps your sympathetic nervous system partially activated at all times. Even when you get into bed, even when the room is dark and quiet, part of your brain is still scanning, still monitoring, still alert. This is why so many people describe lying in bed for hours unable to fall asleep, even though they're exhausted. Their body wants to sleep. But their nervous system won't allow the shift to parasympathetic dominance because it hasn't received sufficient signal that it's safe to stop being vigilant. The threat isn't in the bedroom. It's in the mind, in the unresolved worries that get louder in the silence, in the anticipation of tomorrow's demands, in the accumulated tension of a day spent in a state of low-grade emergency. Addressing this requires more than a wind-down routine. It requires examining the chronic stress load your nervous system is carrying and looking for ways to reduce it, not just at bedtime, throughout the entire day. Regular movement helps discharge accumulated stress hormones. Time in nature helps reset the nervous system. Genuine social connection, not the performative kind, but actual vulnerability and responsiveness, helps regulate the nervous system through co-regulation, boundaries that protect you from taking on more than your system can handle. And perhaps most importantly, the willingness to address the sources of stress rather than just managing the symptoms. Let's examine the relationship between sleep and the things that happen during your waking hours, because sleep doesn't exist in isolation. It's deeply connected to everything else. What you eat, when you eat, how you move, how you manage stress, how much light you get, how much alcohol you consume. All of these factors directly shape the quality of your sleep, and most people treat sleep as a separate category, something that happens after the rest of life is done, when in reality it's an integrated system. Alcohol is one of the most destructive sleep factors and one of the least understood. Most people believe alcohol helps them sleep because it makes them drowsy, and it does. It sedates you. It knocks you into the early stages of sleep more quickly. But it devastates sleep quality. Alcohol suppresses REM sleep almost entirely in the first half of the night. So you fall asleep fast, sleep deeply for a few hours, and then your brain, deprived of REM, compensates in the second half of the night with REM rebound. Fragmented, restless, vivid dreams that wake you up or leave you feeling worse than if you hadn't slept at all. Even moderate alcohol consumption, a glass or two of wine at dinner, measurably degrades sleep architecture, and the effects are cumulative. Regular drinkers develop chronic REM suppression that compounds over time. Caffeine is another factor that people consistently underestimate. Its half-life is roughly 5 to 6 hours, which means if you have a cup of coffee at 2 in the afternoon, half of that caffeine is still in your system at 8, a quarter at midnight. Even if you don't feel its stimulating effects, it's still blocking adenosine receptors, which is the mechanism your brain uses to generate sleep pressure. You might fall asleep, but your sleep will be shallower, less restorative, and you'll wake feeling less recovered than you would without it. Exercise matters enormously, but timing matters too. Regular physical activity significantly improves sleep quality. It helps discharge stress hormones. It deepens slow-wave sleep. It improves circadian rhythm regulation. But vigorous exercise too close to bedtime can delay sleep onset because it elevates core body temperature and activates the sympathetic nervous system. The optimal window is at least 3 to 4 hours before sleep, ideally earlier in the day. Temperature is underestimated as well. Your body temperature needs to drop to initiate and maintain sleep. A cooler room, typically between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit, supports this natural temperature decline. A warm room works against it. Even a few degrees can meaningfully impact sleep depth and duration. Let's talk about something psychologically deeper than sleep hygiene: your relationship to rest itself. Because for many people, the problem with sleep isn't environmental or physiological, it's existential. They can't rest because they don't feel they've earned it. They can't turn off because turning off feels like falling behind. They carry guilt about sleeping because the culture has made productivity the measure of human worth, and sleep looks like the absence of productivity. This is a relationship to rest that's deeply embedded in how we define value: work hard, achieve, produce. And rest becomes something you do only when your body forces you to. Not something you do by choice, not something you honor as essential, but something you grudgingly tolerate as the price of being able to keep working. And when you hold rest in that low regard, your nervous system picks up on it. You don't fully surrender to sleep because some part of your mind is still in productivity mode, still monitoring, still feeling guilty about the hours passing in unconsciousness. This psychological relationship to sleep matters more than most people realize, because sleep isn't just a physical process. It requires a psychological surrender, a willingness to let go of control, to trust that nothing requires your attention for the next several hours, to believe that the world will continue functioning without you conscious in it. People who struggle with control, with anxiety, with the feeling that they must always be available and alert, struggle to access the surrender. And without it, sleep remains superficial, no matter how perfect the environment. Healing this relationship to rest isn't something that happens overnight. It requires examining why you feel you don't deserve sleep, where the belief came from that your worth is tied to your productivity, whether the standards you're holding yourself to are actually yours or whether they were imposed by a culture that benefits from your exhaustion. This isn't just philosophy, it's sleep science. Because the psychological state you bring to your bed matters as much as the temperature of the room you're sleeping in. Let's talk about the 90-minute cycle and how to work with it rather than against it. Because this is one of the most actionable pieces of sleep science, and it's frustratingly simple. Your brain cycles through sleep stages in approximately 90-minute intervals. And waking up in the middle of a cycle creates what sleep researchers call sleep inertia. That heavy, foggy, disoriented feeling that can persist for hours after you wake up. But waking up at the end of a complete cycle, when your brain has naturally transitioned back toward wakefulness, you can feel alert almost immediately. The math is straightforward. If it takes you roughly 20 minutes to fall asleep, and you want to wake up feeling refreshed, count backward from your desired wake time in 90-minute blocks, then subtract 20 minutes for sleep onset. So if you want to wake at 6 in the morning and assuming 20 minutes to fall asleep, you'd want to be in bed by 10:30, which gives you 7.5 hours in bed and roughly 6.5 hours of actual sleep across 5 complete cycles. Or 9 o'clock for 8.5 hours in bed and 7 hours of sleep across roughly 5.5 cycles. This doesn't mean every night will be perfect. Sleep onset varies. Cycles aren't exactly 90 minutes for everyone. But working with this framework rather than just picking an arbitrary hour to set your alarm can meaningfully reduce morning grogginess. And over time, if you track how you feel at different sleep durations, you'll identify your own optimal cycle length, which varies between individuals. But here's what most people miss about this. The 90-minute framework only works if your cycles are actually completing. If your sleep is fragmented, if you're waking multiple times during the night, if stress or alcohol or light exposure is disrupting your architecture, then no amount of cycle math will save you. The framework assumes intact sleep cycles. And if yours aren't intact, the priority shifts from optimizing timing to addressing whatever is fragmenting your sleep in the first place. Let's address the myth of the 5-hour sleeper. The person who claims to thrive on minimal sleep, who brags about it even as if it demonstrates some kind of superiority. This person exists, but their experience is not what they think it is. There is a genuine genetic variation, extremely rare, affecting a small percentage of the population, that allows certain individuals to function well on less sleep. These people have a specific mutation in genes that regulate sleep need, and for them, shorter sleep is genuinely sufficient. Their biology is wired differently. They're not tougher or more disciplined. They're simply built for it. But the vast majority of people who claim to thrive on 5 hours are not this rare genetic variant. They're people who have adapted to chronic sleep deprivation so thoroughly that they've lost the ability to recognize their own impairment. This is well documented in sleep research. People who are chronically sleep deprived consistently underestimate their own cognitive deficits. They feel normal, they function, but their reaction times, their decision-making, their emotional regulation, their creativity, all measurably degraded. They don't notice because the degradation is gradual and because they have no recent baseline of full restoration to compare against. The 5-hour person you admire is almost certainly running on accumulated sleep debt that's impairing them in ways they can't perceive. And the long-term consequences of chronic sleep deprivation are significant. Increased cardiovascular risk, impaired immune function, elevated inflammation, hormonal disruption, accelerated cognitive decline. The cost of insufficient sleep isn't paid immediately. It's paid over years and decades in health outcomes that compound quietly while the person continues to feel fine. So the next time someone tells you they only sleep 5 hours and feel great, don't assume they've found something you've missed. Assume they've been running on fumes long enough to forget what full feels like. And consider that your 8 hours, if they're quality hours, are actually the smarter choice. even if they don't feel like it yet. Let's talk about the morning, because what you do in the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking has an outsized impact on how you sleep that night. This isn't metaphorical, it's biological. Your morning behavior sets the circadian signals that determine your sleep architecture 12 to 16 hours later. Light is the most important signal, as we discussed. But movement matters too. Physical activity in the morning helps flush residual sleep hormones, particularly adenosine, which accumulates during waking hours and contributes to sleep pressure at night. Morning movement also helps regulate cortisol, which naturally peaks shortly after waking and is responsible for morning alertness. If cortisol doesn't peak properly or peaks too late, you feel groggy in the morning and potentially too alert at night. Cold exposure, whether a cold shower or stepping outside into cool air, activates the sympathetic nervous system briefly. This isn't the chronic sympathetic activation that disrupts sleep. It's an acute, self-limiting burst that helps clear morning fog and promotes alertness. And because it's acute, it fades well before bedtime and doesn't interfere with sleep onset. But here's what most morning routine advice misses. The phone. Most people reach for their phone within minutes of waking. And this does several things simultaneously. It exposes your eyes to blue light before you've gotten natural sunlight, which can confuse your circadian signal. It immediately floods your brain with stimuli, social media, news, email, before your nervous system has had time to transition from sleep to waking naturally. And it sets the tone for the day in terms of where your attention goes. External rather than internal, reactive rather than intentional. The 30 minutes after waking, if protected, are extraordinarily valuable cognitive real estate. Your brain is in a transitional state, partially in the hypnagogic space between sleep and wakefulness, where creative insight and pattern recognition are heightened. Filling the space with phone stimulation is like pouring concrete over fertile ground. It kills what might have grown there. Protecting this window, even imperfectly, even for 10 minutes, makes a meaningful difference, not just for the morning, for the entire day, and for the sleep that follows it. Let's bring this back to the bigger picture, because individual sleep optimization, while valuable, exists within a broader context that most sleep advice ignores entirely. You live in a culture that structurally works against your biological need for sleep. Work schedules that require you to be alert at times your circadian rhythm hasn't prepared you for. Social norms that reward staying up late and waking early. An economy that treats your attention as a resource to be harvested at all hours. A phone in your pocket that can reach you at any moment, making true disconnection almost impossible. Optimizing your sleep within the system is like trying to breathe clean air in a polluted city. The individual interventions help, but they can't fully compensate for the environmental conditions. At some point, the question isn't just how do I sleep better? It's why does our society make it so difficult to sleep well? Why have we organized collective life in ways that systematically undermine one of the most fundamental biological needs? These are uncomfortable questions because they suggest the problem isn't individual failure, it's structural. It's a system that values output over recovery, that measures human worth by productivity rather than well-being. That has made rest feel like something you have to steal rather than something you're entitled to. And changing that system requires more than better bedtime routines. It requires a fundamental shift in how we value rest itself. But you can't wait for the culture to change. You have to work within the current reality while recognizing its limitations. You optimize what you can. You protect your sleep as fiercely as you protect any other health parameter. You treat it not as a luxury, but as a non-negotiable biological requirement. And you stop apologizing for it. Stop feeling guilty about it. Stop treating it as time stolen from more important things, because nothing is more important. Not your inbox, not your deadlines, not your social obligations, not your ambitions. All of those things require a brain that's actually functioning. And a functioning brain requires sleep, real sleep, complete sleep. the kind that only happens when your nervous system feels safe enough to fully surrender. Here's what you need to understand. Sleep isn't a passive state you fall into when you run out of energy. It's an active biological process your brain orchestrates with extraordinary precision when given the right conditions. And those conditions aren't complicated, they're just increasingly rare in modern life. Consistent timing, morning light, reduced evening stimulation, a cool, dark environment, managed stress, limited alcohol and caffeine, regular movement, and perhaps most importantly, a psychological relationship to rest that honors it as essential rather than treating it as optional. You don't need to do all of this perfectly. You don't need to transform your entire life overnight. But you need to start taking seriously what you've been dismissing. The tiredness you feel isn't weakness, it's information. It's your body telling you that something in the system isn't working. And the system can be fixed, not with supplements or apps or hacks, with the simple, ancient, increasingly countercultural act of letting your body do what it was designed to do. Rest. Fully. Without guilt. Without interruption. Without the constant low-grade vigilance that modern life has made your default state. Your brain will do the rest. You don't need to sleep more, you need to sleep right. And right now, almost nothing in your life is helping you do that. Start paying attention to what isn't working and start changing it. Not tomorrow, tonight.